Hello again, everyone. This is Stan Scott,
This is Scott K.
and this is episode 4 of the Foggy Bottom Line podcast. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the follow on effects and implications of the quote, big, beautiful bill, unquote, that passed Congress recently. One of the first things we want to mention here is that a lot of what we're about to talk about won't actually take effect until after the midterm elections. So it's important to get this sort of out there and get people started to talking about this because that's done by design. Congress did that by design. Republicans in Congress delayed this implementation until after the midterms next year so that people wouldn't start feeling this before they need to go vote. So that's one of the reasons we want to talk about this. And we both, Scott and I both think that these will have even larger effects in the 59th district, where Scott's running for the House of Delegates, because of the nature of the district, the rural nature of part of the district, and even the more developed parts, some parts of the district. It's a little bit higher poverty, a little bit higher sort of age range, older folks. It's an older demographic. So, initial thoughts on this one, Scott?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this. We're talking about the future and the future impacts, anticipating in advance what issues we might be dealing with. By training in the Army, I was an intelligence officer, and intelligence officers are supposed to like predict the future, to be able to tell the commanders what the bad guy is going to do and when he's going to do it. And from that experience, I found that people really, their eyes glaze over when you talk about the future. They say, I'll deal with it when it gets here. But we're talking about some very, very serious issues that are going to really affect the lives of a lot of people. So we're just kind of projecting. We don't really, I had to turn in my crystal ball when I got out of the Army. But there's just some things that we know are going to be coming, and these are challenges as it relates to me and me being a candidate for the state house. These are issues that the legislature is going to have to wrestle with, and these are issues that the governor will have to wrestle with, and there's a myriad of policy options on how to deal with some of these things, which we won't get into policy options. I don't think in our conversation, but I think it's really helpful to talk about the impact that Virginians are going to experience as the implications and ramifications of not just the big beautiful bill, but also of the Doging of America are felt.
Well, this bill, this is a monster bill. There previously, in a sort of a former life, I analyzed the Medicare for All bill, which is 800 pages long for a congressional candidate, and this bill is even longer than that. It's a monster of a bill, and it does a lot of things. And obviously, we're not going to cover everything in half an hour, but there are some pretty clear things that I want to mention before we start sort of narrowing the focus on the basically cuts to social insurance programs, to poverty programs, right? Support programs for disabled people, for poor people, mostly people who are too young to work or too old to work. But this bill has tax implications for folks like you and me, Scott.
Right.
Huge tax cuts for corporations and for the super wealthy, very high income earners. But what this bill does with respect to taxes is it pretty much just makes permanent the tax cuts that the Trump administration implemented in their first term in 2017, and they applied a sunset to those tax cuts so they wouldn't be seen as destroying the budget, right? Basically killing the budget and increasing the deficits.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that this bill will do is it extends those tax cuts. It makes them permanent, which means middle class folks, folks who are in the middle range of income will pay higher taxes, right?
Right.
They will not get a tax cut now that they would have gotten if these tax cuts had been allowed to expire. Another thing that this thing does is it, 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 it moves a lot of programs. It's basically going to move a lot of the requirements to fund these programs to the states, and specifically these are like I said, anti-poverty programs, support programs,
Right,
SNAP,
right.
right, basically nutrition support, food support for families with children,
Right.
and Medicaid, health insurance for poor people, for disabled people. And one of our one of the folks that we've been talking to a lot, Margie, used to work on Medicaid, and she's given us a lot of insight onto that. So, if you could, Scott, could you share a little bit of what you think about these cuts and that might take the district?
Yeah. Well, circling back to the permanent tax cuts for the wealthy, uh, in order to be able to justify that and get the votes, they had to show some types of savings to offset the lost revenue, and but they didn't want to be too obvious with the cost savings because they knew that they'd get some pushback. And I think that SNAP and Medicaid are two great examples. Uh, they wanted to realize savings from those programs without having to admit that they're being cut. So, having your cake and eating it too. So what they did is they changed the eligibility requirements that would result in fewer people being eligible to receive those benefits. So rather than directly cutting the benefits, they just changed who and how many are going to be able to qualify. So that's kind of the insidious thing, because people don't see it as a real cut, because they can justify that the dollars are still there. But what that does is it makes state decision makers have to decide, okay, so if a X percentage of people who previously received SNAP are no longer eligible, what are we going to do? Are we just going to boot those people off? Or are we going to use state funds to backfill and keep the benefits the same? In any backfilling by the state for any of these social programs, any of these things that are coming down the road that we may talk about, are going to have tax implications for Virginians on their state tax level.
Right.
So it's really tax shifting. It's not just the middle class paying a higher rate of federal income tax with fewer deductions, but it's also pushing a tax burden down to state government if they're going to continue to fund these programs that people depend on, people's lives depend on. So I did a little bit of research, and I was really amazed to learn that, well, not amazed, a little bit surprised to learn that over 700,000 Virginians currently receive SNAP benefits. So those are mothers and kids, basically, that get this supplemental aid to buy nutritious food and groceries. And as these cuts go into place, or these eligibility requirements change, over 100,000 of these people are going to lose their access to SNAP benefits. So that's putting some numbers to this quandary that state government is going to have to deal with. Is what's Virginia going to do for those 100,000 kids and moms? Are we going to just let them go without? Or are we going to move money around or increase taxes and backfill those costs so people can continue to receive benefits at the level that they're currently receiving them? And it's very similar with Medicaid. The trick is the same. The budget trick is the same. And again, the state government's got to decide what are we going to do? Are we going to just let rural hospitals go under? Are we going to use state dollars to close that gap of eligibility for Virginians? So anyway, that's an example of the types of policy issues that states haven't had to deal with in the past that are coming down the pike in 2026 and 2027.
Well, and I don't want to get too deep into numbers, because we don't want anyone's eyes to glaze over
Yeah.
on a podcast. But I looked at some census data, and it appears that something like 19,000 people, kids, families receive SNAP benefits in the 3 counties in the 59th district. And if 1/7 of those folks lose their benefits, that's what about 2,500 families who will no longer have food to eat. And these are children, right?
Right.
These are children who will, be suddenly at risk of malnutrition because of this. And the Virginia Mercury reported that the one estimate of the shortfall for Virginia overall in the Commonwealth on SNAP alone is 352 million, and that's what the Virginia would have to cover if we don't want to sort of place these families at risk of malnutrition. And to me, it's a little hard to reconcile the conservative claim that they're pro-family with
Right.
these kinds of cuts to poor people who need this to avoid malnutrition in children. You're not supporting
Right.
families if you're taking away this kind of support. And Medicaid is an even, in some sense, more interesting case because so many of the people who are on Medicaid right now can't work. And I understand that one of the big changes in the requirements, the eligibility requirements, was it requires sort of a work requirement, right?
Right.
Well, that creates a backdoor way of cut because, like you said, they want to try to make it look like they weren't cutting. We're just going after fraud and people who are lazy, right? But
Right.
even if you do capture some of that, it's a backdoor way of cutting in general because if you make the eligibility requirements stricter and you require people to establish eligibility more often, that's a paperwork bump that people have to navigate. And a
Right.
lot of the people who are on Medicaid are either children. So again, children. So I don't understand how you can say you're pro-family and pro-children when you're cutting health insurance and food support for children. But it's also disabled people and people who are in nursing homes. Okay,
Right.
so you create a more strict reporting requirement for them, and now they have to, now it's harder for them to get eligibility established. They lose the benefit, even though they're technically eligible, right, and should be receiving these payments. And by the way, if it's great grandma in a nursing home, guess where that money is going? And what do you think is going to happen to nursing homes and assisted living facilities when these funds start to dry up? What do you think?
That's a very good. That's a very good point, and that was what I was going to point out. So far, we've been talking about the impacts on individuals of cuts and changes to eligibility, but all these things are in a system, and there's ripple effects that we know are going to happen. That things that are going to be affected. We know that when people don't have health care, that they use emergency room as their primary care. And the law says that hospitals cannot turn away people from emergency care. So people are going to start using emergency rooms at a higher rate, and hospitals are not going to be reimbursed because Medicaid is not going to be there to reimburse them.
Right.
And the hospitals are going to have to suck up that cost. And in a rural area, a pretty big percentage of patients that patronize rural hospitals are on Medicaid. And now
Right.
if the hospitals are not going to be reimbursed and you're going to incur even additional costs with increased emergency room usage, we're going to see damage to our whole already rickety healthcare infrastructure, particularly in the rural areas. And similarly for SNAP, in some rural areas, the majority of people who shop at some of these small grocery stores are SNAP recipients and use their SNAP
Right.
benefits. Now, if those benefits go away, that local business is going to suffer. They're going to lose business, and in many cases, they may not be able to stay open. So we already have vast areas of the 59th district that I consider to be food deserts, where the main place that people can get any food is more convenience stores or a very small market. And if those go if those go under, or we lose some of them, then residents aren't going to have any residents are no longer going to have choices for places to buy food. Uh, so almost all the changes. I mean, we could talk about we could talk about USAID, we could talk about soybeans, we could talk about tariffs, and when we do, we tend to focus on the immediate effect. Because the trickle down, the ripple effect of these things is a little bit harder to anticipate. And they're delayed in time. And people don't always see the relationship between rural hospital going under and reduction to Medicaid funding 2 years earlier. But there is a straight line connection.
And this is an underappreciated point, everyone, that we talk about government spending and cutting deficits and things like that, and I think that one of the things we need to think about is how we can more efficiently use taxpayer funds, right, and use them for the right purposes. But at the end of the day, if we want all the things that we're spending taxpayer money on, then someone has to pay the taxes to support that. But these follow-on effects that we see from these kinds of cuts, when you're talking about, the what you just talked about, Scott, with rural hospitals go under. I think what's the nearest urgent care or hospital if you live in Louisa or Mineral out in Louisa County?
Yeah, interesting you should ask. Yeah, it's 27 miles, which is more like 48 minutes. So a couple of weeks ago, I had a little accident while I was doing a home project that required a trip to the emergency room and 3 stitches. Now, I happen to live in an area where it was 5 miles for me to get to an emergency room to get treatment. But I started wondering, now if I lived on the other side of the district, if I lived in Mineral, which is exactly the example I chose, how many miles and how long would it take for me to get medical care, to get these same 3 stitches? So I did some research and Googling, and if I were in Mineral when I needed to get stitches, I would have had to drive to Fredericksburg, which was 27 miles and about 48-minute travel time. The next
because of the
closest,
roads, it's not an interstate.
The roads, right, because it's all back roads.
Right.
The next closest was Spotsylvania. It was a mile further away and about the same travel time. And then the third was in Charlottesville. So there was no medical care available within a 25-mile radius, 25-mile plus radius of Mineral. And that's the current situation. Now, imagine if, because of all these cuts, the emergency room in Spotsylvania closed.
Right.
So that's one less option, and it's going to place more burden on the remaining healthcare system. So these downstream effects are not really obvious, and to a certain extent, you have to have a little bit of knowledge and understanding of particular sectors to be able to see what the effects are. But we should all, regardless what our technical knowledge of any of these programs are, we should all understand that there are consequences and delayed consequences for all of these changes. Even on the very positive side, if SNAP funding were to double and eligibility requirements were to be lowered so more people could qualify, it would still take about a year for that ripple effect to start kicking in and people to realize the benefit of it. And you and I have talked previously about soybeans. There's a lot of small soybean farms here in the district. In fact, where I live is surrounded by them, and they're just small family farms that grow soybeans. And there's a few things that have happened in Washington since the beginning of the year. One, the elimination of foreign aid and dismantlement of USAID, and then there's just Doge cuts across the board for everything, and then there are tariffs. So when you and I talked, we were immediately thinking of the farmers. What's the impact going to be on the farmers?
Right.
Prices are going to be more uncertain. There's less of a market, which means the prices are going to fall. But as I was doing a little bit more research into this, there's a whole ripple effect into other industries. The Port of Virginia is going to lose business. Tariffs just
Right.
generally, not just on soybeans, but we're going to lose business, maritime business, transportation. But maritime transportation is supported by ground transportation, both rail and truck.
Sure.
And you have to have warehousing facilities in the vicinity of the ports to be able to do that. And with a dramatic decline in trade, and estimates are that Virginia's going to take about a $2 billion hit just because of the tariffs on soybeans. And that's not just farmers.
Wow.
I mean, like I said,
just
maritime,
soybeans.
just as a result of soybeans, right?
Wow.
But it's all the infrastructure and industries that support not just the growing of soybeans, but the transportation,
Sure.
and getting them to market.
Right. Well, and I think, again, these follow-on effects, and, a lot of people think in a shallow way about government spending, right? It's, well, why should government be supporting someone who's poor, right? If they're not working hard enough or whatever, why would we give them free money away? Well, we're doing that, and we're helping to make sure everyone has health care, and everyone has food to eat, especially children, right? But it's important to remember that this kind of spending doesn't stop there with that individual. It moves through the economy and supports other businesses. It supports the small market in a rural area. It supports the small hospital or urgent care center in the rural area. It supports the soybean farmer and the guys that work on the railroad and the guys that drive trucks.
Uh-huh.
All of those folks end up seeing some of that money as it flows through the economy. And then there are other follow-on effects that are less easy to see even. So if I'm working at Walmart and I don't have health insurance and I get sick, I have to go to work, and now I'm making other people sick. So now other people are getting a contagious disease because one person or two people didn't have health insurance. And so we have to think about these things in a deeper way than just, why am I helping this lazy person by feeding them, right?
Right.
And again, it's not even lazy people necessarily. It's children and disabled folks and old folks who can't work anyway.
Or in terms of foreign aid, it's countries that are developing and are haven't built up the infrastructure and supplies to even feed their own people. But going back post World War II in the Marshall Plan, when the U.S. really got heavy into foreign assistance and foreign aid, particularly on the food side, I would like to think that it was out of American altruism that we wanted to help all these people. But the reality is that these plans to ship food overseas, particularly agricultural products, were intended to benefit American farmers, to stabilize crop prices, to create new markets for American agricultural products. And it was just convenient to give it away and call it foreign aid. But really these follow-on effects in these market segments that are affected by changes that we're seeing today were intended to be the beneficiaries and not just incidental to the whole thing.
Well,
So
things, programs like the Marshall Plan and programs like USAID, right? The USAID, that acronym stands for U.S. Agency for International Development. And it's important to remember that the Marshall Plan after World War II and current foreign aid plans in developing countries, um, besides the extremely important part where they support American farmers and American businesses, right, that support farmers, this also helps create new markets for American goods down the road, right? So
yeah,
Germany, the Germans provide us with a lot of manufactured goods that require a lot of our natural resources. They also buy a lot of stuff from us, right? And they wouldn't be there and have the money to do that if without the Marshall Plan. So if you're, when you're talking about developing countries now, as they develop, they will need to buy things from us, not just food, and so it helps create a market. But it also, it should be a little altruistic, and I think to some extent it was and is or should be. But this also helps sort of develop a shared understanding about things like democracy and capitalism, right?
right.
So if the world's most powerful democracy is helping poor people in another country, the poor people in that other country over generations will start to think democracy must be a good thing. America must be a good country. Their people are good people because they helped us in our time of need. And, we should all be thinking about it that way in my mind, at least to some
Right.
extent, right?
Right. That's the soft power benefit of, or
Right.
America wielding soft power. And as international political scientist types, we could talk about that kind of stuff
Yeah, we
forever.
could
But
for a while.
yeah, but uh, USAID, the Marshall Plan, are examples of long-term investments that the government made
Right.
to make the pie bigger for America rather than cut the pie up differently.
Right.
And
Right.
the building of the interstate system in the 1950s, very very similar. It's a huge investment in America's infrastructure, but it created the trucking industry and
Yeah.
it made it possible to eat California tomatoes and strawberries here in Virginia, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and and uh, but at some point in the past, probably around that 1980s time turning point that we've talked about, when things started to get deregulated, we started making decisions to defer the maintenance and creation of existing infrastructure.
Right.
And just here locally, uh, you remember over the holidays, uh, the water system for the city of Richmond failed.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that that had a huge ripple effect in the whole metropolitan area. And the reason that the system failed was because it wasn't maintained. Maintenance was deferred because people didn't want to invest in infrastructure.
Right.
So when we do that, people don't act until there's failure, and then it's too late. In Hopewell, just a couple of months ago, the wastewater treatment failed and dumped all kinds of pollution into the James River. Again, an infrastructure problem. We had
Right.
recent flooding in the region, and bridges wash out again because of neglect of infrastructure and the absence of policies and programs that are looking into the future as investments. Uh, so it's hard to invest and look to the future when you're putting out fires and dealing with things that are
Right.
breaking right now.
Right.
And that's the type of change I think America generally needs to adapt in its style of governance, is to stop waiting for things to break before you fix them. Yeah,
Right.
we've all heard that expression, "It ain't broken, don't fix it." Well,
Right.
that's dumb. That's really
Well,
dumb, and that's where we're at.
just because you haven't seen a catastrophic failure doesn't mean it's not broken.
Right.
It just means the catastrophic failure hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're creating, in a sense, a catastrophic failure by not by reducing the funding and these kinds of bills. Just to circle back, we're coming up on our 30 minutes. But just to circle back and maybe recap a little bit, what we're talking about here is our cuts to the social safety net, right? The benefits for the poorest and weakest among us, the disabled person who can't work, whether they'd like to or not, children who are born into less than ideal circumstances, um, older folks who have worked hard all their lives and now just need a place to be comfortable as they close out the last chapter, right? That's who this hurts. That's who this hurts the most directly. That's who this funding is for, to support them, to help the children grow up to be productive members of society and good workers down the road, because they won't do that if they're malnourished. And then to take care of folks who are at the end of their, in their last chapter, as they seek comfort and stability toward the end of life. But the follow-on effects, those aren't the only folks who are affected by these kinds of cuts. It also affects infrastructure that everyone has to use, like hospitals and markets and farmers. I think the governor of Nebraska came online and said the USAID cuts are costing them $6 billion, and that they're having crops in the field right now that are rotting because the farmers can't sell them, so they're just not going to even harvest it.
Also,
and what happens next year when they have to decide what to plant?
Right. Well, there's also another intersection, and that is there's not enough labor to harvest a lot of these crops, which is why they're in the field. So we characterize the types of things we've been talking about, Stan, as social safety net. I wish we would start talking about them as social infrastructure, because
I like
it. The effects that you're talking about on a child who's malnourished and doesn't have good health care and everything, those are structural things that are going to affect the quality of that person's life. Whereas the investments in that infrastructure to support that child and that family will give us very different outcomes. So if we start looking at people and these food benefits, medical benefits, other social benefits as part of infrastructure, childcare is part of the critical infrastructure in my view. So maybe we can start turning the conversation and get people to pick up on the term social infrastructure instead of social safety nets.
I really, really like that framing, Scott. I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of these things end up happening the way they happen because of the way we talk about it. And it's a whole different podcast episode to talk about social construction, the social construction of some of these ideas, and how the way we talk about things has a very strong impact on what actually happens on the practical side of what's done, what policies are put in place, and how they work. And I really like framing. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we look at terms like safety net as some person screwed up. That's why they need the safety net. It was that they made a mistake. They're falling.
The acrobat on the swing slipped, right?
Right. That it had something to do with themselves and their actions. Whereas infrastructure is not tied to human conduct, right?
Let's create a social infrastructure so that every child has enough food to eat, so everyone has at least a base, minimum level of health care, access to health care, and that's paid for by by society. But a lot, you can think of social safety net in terms of, well, I got sick and I couldn't pay for it, so now I need help from Medicaid or social, SNAP or whatever. But you're right. It's really creating a daycare infrastructure, a food support infrastructure that helps children, young people, get a start in life so that they have a chance to overcome the mistakes they make, and then creates the infrastructure for older folks who have worked their whole lives to find some comfort and stability there in that last chapter, like I talked about. So I really like that framing, and so maybe we can sort of start people talking about this in a slightly different way. And you're very well situated to start doing that as a candidate for public office, right?
I'm going to take it on the campaign trail.
Yeah, take it on the campaign trail. Talk about it, and we'll talk about it in some of our sort of supplemental videos for the podcast. But real quick, your pluggables. Talk about your website and things like that for the campaign.
Scott K for the number 4va.com. Website tells you a little bit about who I am, how I see solutions to problems being framed. Very focused on human-centered. I think you can tell by conversation. Focused on human-centered solutions to problems. Follow us on social media. We hope to be entertaining, get stuff out on a regular basis. And if you like this podcast, or you like the types of solutions that I'm proposing as a candidate, please feel free and maybe even obligated to support Foggy Bottom Line and Scott K for VA. So
and you can donate to Scott's campaign if you're so inclined, and you've got a couple of nickels for the tip jar. You can donate to his campaign. There's a donate button on the website, or you could just do a search for Scott Konopasek on Act Blue. That's one way. And the website would have a mailing address if you just wanted to write a check and mail it in. You can support Foggy Bottom Line in two ways. There's a Patreon, so go to Patreon and at Foggy Bottom Line. But there's also a Venmo at Foggy Bottom Line if you use Venmo. So either one of those, we'd appreciate a couple of nickels to tip us a little bit. So to help pay for the infrastructure and the software we use. You can find Foggy Bottom Line.
And tips are not taxable now.
Tips are not taxable now, right? That's one upside to the big beautiful bill. I doubt if the IRS is going to let me make that claim when I file my tax return for this. But we really appreciate those of you who are watching and or listening. You can see the video version of this is on YouTube, of course, with some short vignettes on places like Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. I'm looking at joining Twitch as well. And there's an audio. The audio version is on Spotify, just if you do audio podcasts. And we're working to get on Apple Podcasts as well. So we appreciate all you listeners. Share, subscribe, share it, comment, give us feedback. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. If you have thoughts on subjects you'd like for us to talk about, please let us know. We want to cover a wide range of subjects, and we're still a little bit exploratory on that. So we'll talk about the stuff that interests us, of course, but we'd like to talk about some stuff that interests you as well, and maybe even some other silly things like football. This football season just started. We could talk sports both from an entertainment standpoint, but as a business standpoint, we'll do some of that. And then right now we're talking about issues that matter to Virginians and to the country during this campaign season, and then the next campaign season for the national offices next year. So we appreciate you guys listening. We'd appreciate some tips if you got a couple of nickels to throw our way. Scott K4va.com. That's the number 4va.com.
Right.
And then at Foggy Bottom Line in various places, and the blog is www.foggybottomline.com. That's all for this time. Be on the lookout for short videos. Any last words there, Scott?
I would say if you like what you hear, encourage us. Give us reasons to keep going.
That's right. Yeah, that's well put. Appreciate that. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week. We'll do episode 5 in about a week. And we're just going to keep it coming until someone tells us or makes us stop. But we're both a bunch of crusty old Army combat soldiers, and we both swore to defend the Constitution, and we're not going to be quiet as things start to go south for people who can't, in some ways, protect themselves. So we want to get some stuff out there and talk about what's going on in the world, in the country, and in Virginia. So thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Carry on.